Hello, everyone, and welcome to Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people and others in the autism community to learn from their stories, experiences, and get their advice. One thing that I've struggled with as an entrepreneur is to communicate visually the message of what Autism Personal Coach does because I'm not a visual thinker at all. That's why when I get a chance to talk to someone like today's guest, Ron Kearns, I'm fascinated to learn from him because he has a skill set that is something that doesn't come naturally to me at all. Ron talks about his career as a graphic designer today and gives advice on how autistic people can become more successful in the graphic design field. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Ron, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Wanted to start out like I normally do on each of the Autism Stories episodes. Where does your story in the autism community begin?
Around 2011 or so. Before then, I would have never guessed I was autistic. Kind of assumed I was just like everybody else, even though I had immense difficulties and struggles and all of that. I would have never associated it with autism. And then around 2011 or so, I started watching that show Parenthood. And I was watching the kid Max, who eventually got diagnosed. I was watching him every week going, gosh, he's a lot like I was when I was a kid. His parents were having the same discussions with his teachers as mine did. And so one day I was just sitting there actually watching the show and grabbed my laptop and started Googling. And that's when it was like, the light bulb went off. And so that was 2011-ish or so. And then around 2014, I was having difficulty with job search, like pretty much most autistic people do. And so then I kept on. I had found some organizations that would help and be assistant, but of course, needed to determine eligibility, which means get a diagnosis. So in 2014, I actually went in and got a diagnosis. And so going in to get the diagnosis, walking in the door, I'm like, is she really going to give me a diagnosis, or is she just going to think it's all in my head and I don't know? So that doubt was squashed when, after all of the evaluations were done, and she was going over the full report with me, telling me what everything meant, and then she just stops and says, "How in the world did you get so far and for so long?" And she ended up giving me a diagnosis of autism, severe range of impairment, to emphasize and to kind of assumption, perhaps, I would have had this, that maybe I was borderline, maybe not. And she wanted to emphasize that, it was just the impairment. So she explained that to me great. So anyway, so that's where it began. So like I said, before then, I would have never have guessed.
Now, you're currently working as a graphic designer at Missouri State University, West Plains. I read that you said that this has been the best job you ever had. I wish everyone can say this is the best job I've ever had. What's made this such a good fit for you?
The first aspect of it is it's the first full-time regular job I've had in which I knew going in from day one I was autistic, and that my managers and everybody I was working with knew I was autistic. That helps tremendously with understanding and being patient and all of that. Felt so comfortable in the interview. Well, the interview itself, it wasn't long into the interview when one of the people on the panel read off their diversity and inclusion statement for the university and asked me my feelings about that. And then it was later on they wanted to see some samples of my work. So I pulled out my portfolio and showed them samples of work, and they were raving about it and saying how great they were. So when the question of what are your strengths and weaknesses, I figure at this point, so anyway, so I explained to them that I was autistic, and explained to them a few things that I have done to help manage that. At the time I was in Toastmasters. I had done a lot of work within professional associations and professional networking, that sort of thing. And so then there was just this overall global feeling of understanding, and even in some way, like the feeling that me being autistic, someone appreciate the fact that I've done all this great work in the past, and this and that and this, and I still do, whether for the university or through my freelancing, and yet I'm autistic. And like I said, being a public university and all that kind of stuff, it's almost appreciated. Also, the whole sense of belonging and not feeling like an intruder, that's helped out a lot.
I'm curious, during the interview, a lot of times people are unsure of, should I disclose, should I not disclose? What went into your thought process in disclosing that to the university?
Like I said, after they had read their diversity and inclusion statement, they had raved about my samples of work, and then just the overall feeling I got from those that were there, I was like, okay, these people are going to understand. These people are going to, like I said, even appreciate the fact that I've done all this despite me being autistic.
Now, Temple Grandin has talked for years about thinking in pictures. I'm wondering if that's something you can relate to as being a graphic designer.
Actually, yes. I had never thought about that concept until I saw the movie. And then I was like, that's what I do. And I had never realized it before. But then when they depicted and when they illustrated in the movie, they would have the lines and all of the stuff on the screen in the background, illustrating her thoughts. I mean, that's what I do. I can even remember as a kid in school, lining things up visually in my mind and all that. But it's something I had never really, it's the same thing with like masking. And, it's something I'd always done, but I never realized I was doing it.
Now, prior to your current job, you haven't necessarily had many full-time jobs over the last decade that certainly many people listening to this podcast can relate to. What did you do to continue to make income and pay your bills over this time period?
I had one really good job from 2004 to 2009. Okay, so next year will be 30 years that I've been out of school and out in the workplace. I've probably been unemployed about half of that time, roughly. There was a job I had from 2004 to 2009 that lasted 5 years, and 5 years is the longest I've been in any one workplace. Over the last 10 years, I've been unemployed for 7 of the last 10. Because I only got this job in 2018. I freelanced. I managed to network through professional associations, keep in good contact with people like the printing companies I do work with, and that always provided a steady enough stream of work to scrape by on. And a lot of people ask, why don't you just do that full time and not even bother with the full time job? And that's something that crossed my mind quite a bit, but always came back to freelancing. Freelancing is great. I still do it now, but as a full time for me, it was never was totally sufficient enough to say, okay, I'm just going to do full freelance. I said it was good enough to scrape by on, and then it was never consistent. Mm-hmm. I can have a bunch of really great jobs in 1 month and then go 3 months with nothing, and with me and the family, and then of course, then you got to consider things like insurance, health insurance, and all that kind of stuff. It just wasn't feasible, for me and providing for family and all that kind of stuff.
So finding work can be certainly tough. Maybe never been a tougher time than in 2020. And part of that is getting those jobs is the interview process. What do you think can be done in the interview process to be more beneficial to autistic and neurodiverse people?
In most every interview I've been in, it's the sit down here at the table in the conference room amongst 1 to 5 different people and having to communicate verbally everything and perform just so. And I think in a lot of professions, especially mine, it does better when instead of having to sit there and verbally talk and communicate that way with everything, is to just have a process in which you do it. You actually demonstrate your abilities and talents instead of just trying to say it. Because me saying it the way I say it doesn't come across very well. I mean, in comparison to maybe somebody else. And so, yes, that was one of my hurdles. And then, as much as I hate to say it, a lot of companies need to get over because one thing I heard a lot if I would ever get feedback at post-interview, you get the call, or an email, we chose somebody else. So then, of course, you want some feedback. Well, is there anything? And it was always, well, that person was just a better fit. And sometimes you just got to get over that.
You just wish companies would be more direct and say these are the things that you could work on to do better. Yeah.
Well, because better fit was just a way to get around it.
Right.
Without saying, well, we don't want you because whatever. Anyway, no. What I meant by better fit was you have somebody else who's perhaps more talented, has better skills, and work overall, but he's not a good fit. We'll take him instead. That's and that sort of thing.
Now, your freelance work is done through Kearns Creative. Are you still?
Actually, a couple of years ago, I changed it. It's Studio Kearns. When I finally launched my website, I found out that somebody somewhere had KearnsCreative.com, and I was like, I didn't want to go through all this wrangling trying to figure out a way to do the URL. So I figured I'll just stay and change the name to Studio Kearns. It was available, and so that's what it is now.
And how can people learn more about Studio Kearns?
Oh, they can just go to Studio Kearns. That's KERNS.com, or find me on LinkedIn.
Now, I know as someone who runs an organization that trying to get your message across is always so important. What type of organizations have you previously worked with to develop effective graphic solutions so people can really understand what those organizations are trying to achieve?
Over my career, I have worked with most every kind of company or organization you can think of. Most recently, I designed a new logo that's going to be launched soon. I worked with the Learning Disabilities Association of America to develop their entire brand new logo and branding, which, like I said, is going to be launched sometime early next year. I currently work with Missouri State University at their small outpost campus in a town called West Plains. Daily, I am work to develop those graphic solutions for a number of different audiences. Some of my stuff speaks to prospective students. Some of my stuff speaks to current students, or just specifically to the athletics department, or whatever. And then, before that, I've done annual reports for organizations such as ARC of North Texas and a great nonprofit in Baltimore called Abilities Network. Both of those provide services and support for people with disabilities. I've done work for Disney through a previous role with a international veterinary pharmaceutical company that I was with. That's the company I was with for 5 years. So when I was with them, I would develop branding and product and packaging for stuff that would go within Petco and PetSmart. And then, I started my career with an ad agency in Detroit doing advertising for Chevrolet. So I've got a vast, wide range of experience doing pretty much anything you can think of.
So thinking about freelance work for the talented and creative autistics who are listening to this podcast and are trying to figure out, well, where do I start if I want to do freelance work? What's kind of your advice to them on some of those first steps?
Get good relationships with vendors, such as your printers. Your local printers are awesome because they have customers come to them to say, hey, I need this brochure printed, but I don't have anybody to design it. Well, then they'll say, oh, I know a guy. And there you go. Most advantageous thing that worked for me, which was hard, was professional networking. I lived and worked in Dallas for 20 years. For the last 6 or 7 of those years, I was highly active in the American Marketing Association, the Dallas-Fort Worth chapter. And I actually kind of became their unofficial, designer for the whole 600-member chapter. It was all volunteer, but you become known. All of these people who are potential clients, when you go to the happy hours and you go to the luncheons, you're constantly meeting people who could possibly, say, hey, I need somebody like you. And now, was it 4 years since I've moved away from Dallas? I'm still getting called on. Oh, yeah, this guy from American Marketing Association was talking about you and referred me to you. And that was 4 years ago. Developing the personal and professional relationships, get your name out there. And with the AMA, for instance, in 2016, I was named the chapter's Volunteer of the Year for the graphic design work I did for them. When I went to the luncheon that day, I knew I was going to be getting the volunteer for that specific month. So I thought, oh yeah, it's fine. Okay, a month, that's good. And then when I sat down and all of a sudden they named me Volunteer of the Year, I was like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. But yeah, it was pretty cool. One great thing about that is, as you probably know, autistic people don't typically get acknowledged much. And so being acknowledged in that way was just mind-blowing.
I'm wondering, so obviously, like you said, networking is a really important thing to do. And we connected initially on LinkedIn. So I'm wondering for you, how do you see as social media in helping autistic folks to network?
It does help because you can find people and network with them online. And that's great, especially now since a lot of in-person professional networking is kind of at a standstill. And so that can at least get the ball rolling. I started professional networking before I knew I was autistic. But even then, I knew it was difficult for me. I even would tell my wife, I consider it therapy. I didn't even know. Like I said, I didn't know I was autistic. I just knew it was difficult for me. But I knew that in my job being a communicator, that just the practice of going out there and talking to people like that, it definitely wouldn't hurt my job career, doing what I do, in like having to communicate with clients, to have that exercise. Because one thing I found is the more regularly I did it, the easier it became. And the great thing about AMA was, because yes, I did network a lot through AMA, but I also found other groups. The great thing about AMA though was, especially later on, I could walk into a room of 200 people. I'll know half of them. So it made the process of getting to know people you didn't know a little easier, because I could go up to one guy and said, hey, somebody I know. Hi, how you doing? And then that guy would say, oh, you know this person? Somebody I don't know. And make that introduction that much easier. And but I did make a point of going out and dipping my toe into other organizations or other events, just to not get stuck in comfort and to expand my and expand the network. So in that way, LinkedIn, I would get of course their business cards still rule. I don't care what anybody else says. You need a business card, and you need to be able to give it to people. And so then at the end of an evening, that night or the next morning, I would be on LinkedIn. Okay, here's this person. Okay, I met this person. We'll find them on LinkedIn. Hi, great to meet you last night. That sort of thing. And that way, that's a good way to continue the conversation, as they say.
Definitely some good advice. Well, Ron, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for talking with me today.
Oh yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Thanks to everyone for listening, and thanks so much to Ron for the conversation. To learn more about Ron and Studio Kearns, check out the link in the podcast description for this episode. You will also find a link for a free call to discuss how coaching from Autism Personal Coach can be helpful to you. So book a call with me today. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. We would also appreciate it if you could give us a positive rating and review, as it will help others to learn about Autism Stories. On the next episode of Autism Stories, for the first time, we interview two siblings, Bernard and Burnett Grant. Look forward to that, and talking to you then.